On this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds, we discuss why we created this podcast, what the purpose of this podcast serves, and then the part two, we transition into an article that Kickstarter wrote where they discuss some of the achievements of 2024. We contrast the numbers of this article with GameFound from our previous episodes. Let's get into it.
Game begin.
Let's go.
Lightning bolt, Facebook ad, Facebook ad.
That's awesome.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lowen, and I am joined as always by Sean. And boy, I'm feeling a little sick today. The flu is hitting our household. So you may hear me cough or some. I'll try to minimize that, edit those things out. But this episode I really wanted to record this week because rather than asking Sean to do it for me or something, because I wanted to get something out in the air, in particular about the GameFound episodes that we did over the last couple of weeks. We had last week was an episode about subject lines, but we received some feedback and wanted to kind of just make sure that we opened up, what's going on behind the scenes for you guys. So when we talked to Alex Radcliffe, he's the chief marketing officer of GameFound, we had a good discussion. And then the next week we talked about things again. I kind of, reached some conclusions in between 1 week and the next. And I was like, let me just share what's going on here. And some people took it as like a hit piece toward GameFound. And what we want to do, rather than try to address that and say, oh, it wasn't. I mean, we said some really critical things about GameFound. And I stand behind most of those things. And I think I'll be corrected on some of those things. And so we want to actually bring Alex Radcliffe back to discuss the podcast episode that we did where we were critical of GameFound. And like I said, Alex is a great friend of the podcast, great friend, to me personally. I think he shared his thoughts with me, and he was, kind of just very honest with me. And I was like, this is great content that I want others to hear. So let's hash it out on the podcast, and so that's kind of what we're planning on doing. But before we do that, we're going to kind of work behind the scenes with Alex and talk about some very specific examples, because we want to get like real data. And Alex has while he has a lot of great data on hand, the very, very specific data, we want him to be able to speak to specific examples. And so we wanted to work with Alex, figure out particular projects that we wanted to talk about and dive into the details and that kind of thing. And he was really happy to do that. And I think that it'll be, be good for GameFound, and then good for us too. And so the reason that I brought that up right at the start is so that, those listening that are, advocates of GameFound can know that we have a podcast coming up that will be helpful and clear the air a little bit, something that you can look forward to. But also, it kind of brings up the reason for our podcast's existence. And Sean, I guess, what do you see? Like, why do you see? What do you see as like the primary reason or reasons that this podcast exists?
To dunk on people we don't like.
Oh man.
Well, it really serves as an outlet for us to kind of vent some of our thoughts and compile them and make sense out of them, things that we're learning in the industry. It provides a resource for our clients that we can link to. So it internally helps us. If we have questions, we can direct them to a podcast we've done on that particular topic. And it also acts as a marketing of our services, right? It's people who are just organically searching the web for different topics and subjects can stumble upon our podcast and then hear about our services, hear about our expertise. So it's a bit of a mix of everything. So when you listen to a podcast, it's probably like switching between those things. And I think sometimes it can be confusing because we can maybe be very professional in some sense and then in another sense be a little bit lax. And I think that can be a great advantage because it helps us be honest. The disadvantage is that you can often say things that you might say, oh, maybe that could have been worded better, or I can
Yeah.
understand how that was misinterpreted, or something to that effect. So look, I really appreciate Alex reaching out to you and sharing his grievances. I think it's a testament to his character, because anyone could just say, okay, those guys, screw those guys, I'm never talking to them again. They just kind of like blacklist them and kind of move on with your life. But the fact that he wants to clear the air and actually bring up some of the grievances that he felt that we didn't do a great job in explaining certain things, I think that I really appreciate it, and I think it's something that's worth doing. So I'd love to have him back on, love to continue this discussion in greater detail. I think people need to understand as well is that we already had 2 episodes, right? So we had,
Mhm.
what was it, episode 215, we had Alex on, and we're trying to answer one question on that podcast: should you use GameFound for 2025? And then the next episode, 216, was specifically about AdFound, this new feature that they launched on the very week that we did that podcast.
Mhm.
So I think maybe one reason why we were a bit more aggressive is that we wanted to make sure that that first episode wasn't advertising or condoning AdFound in the same breath, because it came out at the same time. So we wanted to just make sure that this is a separate episode, separate issue, and we wanted to address some of our concerns with that, just that advertising model in general. Um,
Right.
because I think the model is fundamentally opposed to how we conduct our business. So that was probably coming out probably
Yeah.
bit too aggressively in that episode, because there's a lot of issues wrapped up into that. That's not just including GameFound. It's we ourselves have been, uh, you know, what's the word I'm
Victimized
looking for?
by such a
Victimized
model
this, yeah,
in the
by the
past.
model. Yeah, we've lost lots of money through this model, so we're not particularly fond of it. So that's probably having a part of it as well. Part of my own
Mhm.
personal preferences of being a cypherpunk and kind of exalting privacy above data harvesting is probably also kind of coming out my own personal biases. So all those things take with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I think it's very important to recognize our own personal biases. One of the most obvious ones, and I think we said this on our podcast, we should have, but AdFound is kind of a competing service to what it is that we offer. Although I'll say we're more of a boutique service where, a lot of people ask, like, why use Launch Boom? Why use Crowdfunding Nerds? Why use Jellop or, BackerKit ads, or, GameFound's AdFound program? And what makes us different, and the primary things that makes us different are we build all of the assets in our clients account so that they own everything that we do, and which is really important. If you're making money with marketing, you're not required to use the same company forever in order to keep the results, and you have all of that data, you own all of that data. It's very important. It's not very important if it's your very first project and you're just hoping to fund, but it's very important when you're a successful company and you decide it's in your best interest to make a change. You're only able to make a change if you own the data and you can take it with you. It'd be like if you owned an email list, but you wanted to switch from Kickstarter to GameFound, and then they deleted your email list. If you did that, it's like, well, that's kind of keeps you stuck, right? On one platform or another. So anyway, but I want to also add one other thing to I guess, to like, why did this podcast, it was originally created, and even to this day I still consider it a very scientific podcast about the discovery of what works. Science is really all about the discovery of things, and I've always taken, like, I'm a huge science fan. Like, I can't just, I'm not interested in reading science or about science. I'm interested in, for example, they say the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. They say the universe is 14.6 billion years old. I want to come up with, like, where did they find that data? Where are the equations? Let me do the equation as well and figure out what I come up with. I want to know how they figured those things out, and lots of other things. I love things like Stephen Hawking's bubble theory and lots of other concepts. It's super fun for me. And one of the things that I find specific to science is the law of gravity is really not a law, it's a theory. The theorem of gravity is something that is, well, it's theoretical, because it's possible that we don't have all of the data. So we know how gravity works on Earth, but we can't measure the way gravity works in a, let's say, for example, a black hole. We can come up with, a lot of different measurements and, based on what we can observe, but we can't actually go into a black hole and measure anything because you'd be crushed into the size of like a, small little atom. But it's it's something that could end up changing. Like some of the things that they're talking about, in relation to science and the way that time works and everything, the way that expansion works in space. They have these dark matter, dark energy theories that are related to time moves much faster in empty space than it does around bodies of mass, bodies of matter. And it's a really fascinating theory. But I love stuff like that because it's not about, there's no, it's kind of like math. Like there's a right answer and a wrong answer. There's no political answer, and there's just discovery. And sometimes, people will get more like religious in science than anything, where they refuse to accept, for example, that the sun was the center of the solar system back in Galileo's day, um, or other things like that. And but it's like about the discovery of the truth, and the pursuit of that, the pursuit of truth and understanding. And that's why this podcast exists to me, because as we are actively working as a marketing company, working on, a few dozen crowdfunding campaigns and pre-marketing, that are live on Kickstarter or GameFound or post, we've got I don't know, 2 to 3 dozen campaigns that we're working on at any given time. Um, that's something that we learn a lot of lessons, and we just want to share what it is that we've been learning. And whether it's right or wrong, it's our perception that I think is important to share, because it's the journey of, or the discovery of, what is true doesn't go from I know nothing to I know everything. It goes from I understand a little piece of the puzzle here, and evidently I had that piece in the wrong place. Now I understand that one little piece goes in a different place, or it connects. This information that I learned, for example, about GameFound, maybe connects in a different way than I thought. So it's very important for me to be able to share what I'm what I'm actually seeing. Because if I have to worry about hurting feelings when sharing data, I'm actually not very I don't know, like my wife would probably tell you I kind of am a little bit bullheaded sometimes, and if I have to speak the right words on the first go, I'm pretty much doomed to failure. And whereas my wife, what she'll do is, in a way, I almost need to talk in order to be able to process and like, you know, well, I guess reason. In order to be able to reason, I need to speak. And my wife is the exact opposite, where oftentimes in our relationship, I will win an argument in the first 15 seconds, and then she'll go kind of think about it for 15, 20 minutes, come back, and I get slaughtered with facts, and I don't have anything that I can do. That's how her brain works, where she thinks about things and figures out all the angles and then comes back. And that's when, in order to actually process and rationalize and understand what she's saying, I have to reason through it by talking with her. And it's like, oh yeah, that's right. You're correct in this area and whatever. And I think it's very important to not be afraid to admit when I'm wrong, because that is when, there's, as I said before, like the puzzle piece, it's like, oh, it went in the wrong place. I would feel like a real idiot if I was doing I don't know, a 300-piece puzzle or a 1,000-piece puzzle, and I refused to remove a puzzle piece that clearly doesn't belong in the position that I've placed it. I just, you're going to mess yourself up. You're going to slow yourself up, and you might not ever complete that puzzle because you refuse to, to see the evidence right in front of your face that you were wrong. And so I don't mind admitting when I'm wrong. And I look forward to those times, because that means that I get to learn, and, I get to, I guess, just I know I think the why is what we seek. It's like if for example, like we were talking about the what in a couple of podcasts ago with like the Dice Towers GameFound campaign versus the Kickstarter, and we are like it doesn't look like it's going as well as their last year's Kickstarter campaign, and the why is what we were so concerned about. The what was very much in front of our face. They raised $100,000 less on day one or whatever. Or they raised something like 170K on day one in their 2024 campaign, and they raised around by the time I looked at it, it was about 100,000. I want to say within the first 4 days of their GameFound campaign, which is really really slow comparative to before. Now, that we could, I think that will be an excellent example to use when we're talking with Alex, because the way that campaign actually ended, it ended in a very close proximity to where they were in previous years. Like it seems like it's not such a fail like we thought it was, because they funded at $350,000. And yes, the last year they funded at like 387 or something. And but if you look at the year before that, they funded at like 410, so, or 400 something like that. And so they were, yeah, it was like 410. And then so, but they're about in line with where they were in for the Dice Towers 2021 Kickstarter campaign. They actually raised more dollars than they did in 2021 by a couple thousand, even though they had fewer backers. But so that's something that we'll talk about, that I am going to have to kind of backtrack on my, on some of my opinions, and I'm okay with that. So
Well, the one thing that greatly hindered that project was that VAT was being included in digital rewards. So I think that was maybe one reason why there was a bit of a uh, maybe delay in funding.
Mhm.
People wanted to get an answer before they jumped in.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that'll be something that will be a fun conversation to have. Alex is actually going to be able to give us a lot of insight into that one in particular. So, but
I suppose
yeah.
long
So,
story short, we're essentially going to be interviewing Alex again just to go over some of the things that we've spoken about in the past 2 episodes with involving GameFound. So stay tuned. It's not over yet.
oh yeah, and actually on this episode, we now want to kind of transition into a discussion of a brand new article that Kickstarter released titled "2024 was a big year for games on Kickstarter." This is something that Kickstarter clearly produced in response to, well, this is the way I perceive it. Kickstarter produced this in response to GameFound's article, kind of claiming the title of GameFound being the #1 tabletop platform or board game platform. And so Kickstarter is like, oh yeah, and gave some of their data where they didn't reference GameFound at all, but they used language that was very clear, like, we read your article and we're going to set the record straight and we're better than you. It's like kind of what some of the tone that I'm gathering from what is written. Although, you know the actual written word is quite a low amount of like overall communication. That's like a low percentage of overall communication. I still think you can read some tone in to what people write sometimes.
Well,
And
certainly, because some things don't even seem to be really on topic. So,
yeah.
for example, just at the very top, I'll read this paragraph, which is sort of hinting at what you're saying. And this is a quote from this blog post. It says, "This past year also saw 70% of games backing from cross-category backers, supporters who also pledged to projects in design and technology, comics, and publishing. The unique advantage of Kickstarter's diverse creative ecosystem. Because we support such a wide range of creative projects, game creators gain access to engaged backers with diverse interests, increasing the chances of discovery and support from new audiences." So I kind of feel like that's just kind of like, hey, this is our unique proposition. This is what makes us unique, is that we're not just games. We have this huge ecosystem of different people, and by launching with us, you're going to get access to all these other demographics of people who know how crowdfunding works, and you can kind of tap into those. And 70% is a huge number.
Yeah, it is. It is something that they're trying to show. So like what we always do, like what you and I always do, is we say, okay, Kickstarter has roughly 7 million unique visitors per year, and it's like between 7 and 8 million, and GameFound has between 1.5 to 2.5, something like that. But when you compare apples to apples, it's like Kickstarter has roughly 35 to 40% of the amount of money they've earned is in games. The game, tabletop in particular, but the games category. And I think it was 38% of Kickstarter's revenue. The last year I looked at it was, the last year they made public data, I think that was 2023, was from the tabletop category. And that is a huge chunk of revenue. So what they're saying is, so what we normally do is we normally say, okay, you've got, let's just say, to keep it real simple, 7 million, yearly backers and whatnot. But then if you look at, just tabletop, I'll take 38% of that. It's really only like 2.6 million or 2.7 million backers that if you just slice the pie according to what percentage of funding, it's only it's a very comparable slice to GameFound. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to show that that is not an apples to apples comparison, that they have 70% of their backers that back other things also back games. So they're telling me that instead of 38%, I should really be slicing in to that 7 million with a 70% of those people back games. And that's definitely a bold claim to make. But it's there. So that'd be close to 5 million of the 7 million are organic traffic, in theory for Kickstarter is what they're kind of insinuating here. And so what they're trying to do is they're obviously like a peacock showing their like strutting their feathers, and or like a frog that's like totally puffed up its what do you call it, the like its neck, to show how awesome he is to prospective creators looking to house their new project on Kickstarter GameFound. It's like they're really trying to win over people with their own version of the truth. And I use that phrase not intentionally saying they're being deceptive. In fact, actually, one of the things that Alex had a real problem with was me using the terminology sus. Maybe I'm not like one of the cool kids or something, but sus didn't mean it wasn't such a severe diss. It was I think the way that I used it wasn't the way that it was interpreted. But I think that using facts to kind of spin the narrative a little bit in your support is something that we've kind of grown accustomed to, especially in today's day and age. I mean, there's, every news media outlet has the like a giant washing machine that they spin all of their stories in, and it has to support whatever their narrative is. Now, GameFound and Kickstarter are not nearly so polarizing as like Fox News versus CNN or something, but where like the same story will get two very different spins. But I do think that these companies are both just trying to share a version of the truth that is most in support of what of their platform. I don't think that there's anything wrong with doing that either. I think that it's to be expected. But as someone that's kind of an independent person just coming in and reading, you have to kind of take account of the natural bias, right?
Well,
You
it's
know,
marketing, isn't it? They're trying to present the best information that makes them both look as favorable as possible, which is fine. So I think maybe this is where the term, sus is being used. It's not that it's full on deception, but it is presenting data in such a way to promote your service, which is what's happening here. And that's fine, but just to be aware that this is what's happening, that this is a marketing tool, a technique to say, hey, it's the same that we do the same thing with marketing games, right? If there's a really unique aspect about it, we emphasize that. We don't really emphasize things which maybe aren't as unique or maybe even bit deleterious to the success of the product. You just kind of go, oh yeah, that's it there, but let's focus on this. This is really good, isn't it?
Absolutely. One of the things that I hate doing as a creator, so like I make games too, and one of the things that when I launched Deliverance on Kickstarter back in 2021, there was The Witcher released, probably one of the highest funded tabletop games of all time, which was the tabletop adaptation of The Witcher, and it happened to launch right before I did. And if there's any game that's like, Deliverance is a game about like spiritual warfare and that kind of thing. If there's any game that I would say this is pretty dang close, The Witcher gets really close. It's about, 70% similar in regard to theme, and it has a way bigger intellectual property. And one of the things that people would ask me every so often is, why should I back Deliverance instead of The Witcher? And it's very tempting for me as a creator to say, oh, The Witcher, is this, and that is wrong with it. And Deliverance is way better because of X, Y, and Z. But of course I would say something like that. That's my, I'm financially incentivized, not only financially, but like I want my product to be successful, and I want it, it's the baby that I've been working on for years. So I want it to grow, and I want it to, to see the light and just take flight. Right. And so I'm naturally very, in a way, like it's natural to be emotional about the way that I would respond to such a question, but so that's why I don't like responding to questions like that. Um, and other creators are the exact same. So oftentimes we'll have creators that are like, okay, I'm going to launch on such and such date. In fact, we had a situation like this. I don't want to get too specific, but a very recent situation like this where there was a creator that we're working with that was like, I need to switch my launch date because the biggest game in my little niche is launching on that day, and I'm going to get killed by them because it's just a way more popular game, way well-known IP, and my little game that I'm trying to make is just going to get, decimated by this one. So rather than what they're in essence saying is, rather than compete head to head and try to answer those questions and spin the narrative in my favor, I'm just going to wait until that ship sails, and then I'm going to launch, and then I won't have to answer those questions. Right.
Mhm. So another thing in this article that I think is worth mentioning is that they say that they have an 80% success rate of
Mhm.
people actually funding, which I thought was super high. They actually say it's the highest it has been in 15 years. So I think people are sort of learning that you can't put a napkin on Kickstarter and fund, that you actually have to be prepared. You have to have all your numbers lined up. So I think the culture has turned more into, frankly, a pre-order store at this point, where basically finished products are being
Yep.
advertised and people are basically pre-ordering finished products. So that's clear from, I think, a statistic like that.
Yeah. So the article says table. Oh, by the way, there's like there are little shots here and there in to GameFound, I think, or to the GameFound article, which tabletop games leading the way. Tabletop games hyphen where Kickstarter remains the largest crowdfunding platform. It's like, tell me that's not a shot fired across the bow of
By
GameFound.
the way,
Yeah.
it's like name dropping, isn't it?
Right.
So I went to lunch
Yeah.
with drop a name.
Yeah. So we're kind of a big deal. Anyways, so they do share some really interesting information in this article. I highly recommend you guys read it. But so tabletop games, where Kickstarter remains the largest crowdfunding platform, continues to be the biggest subcategory in games. In 2024, 83% of all games pledges went to tabletop projects, which also saw growth across key success metrics. And the word growth is in bold, growth. So they're saying like we're getting bigger and more awesome. They said 6,646 tabletop game projects launched, 5,314 of those successfully funded, and that's where they're getting the 80% success rate, the highest in our 15-year history. And actually, that is pretty high. I looked at previous metrics had that number just a couple of years ago at like 70%. So it's pretty big. And this also kind of closely mirrors the data on tabletop analytics. So I want to say tabletopanalytics.com has roughly $213 million pledged, but Kickstarter's data, they're saying they've had about $220 million pledged to successful tabletop campaigns, which it's not like a one-to-one correlation. Tabletop Analytics is trying to scrape data, but they're really close. It's almost like whenever Google Analytics and Facebook ads are within like a 10% error or margin of error from one another, I say as a marketer I can trust those numbers, and so these are very close to what the other platform that's scraping data is showing. So the numbers are trustworthy.
Yeah, so they just to be clear that this is tabletop specific, so they have separated video games to a different category here.
Yes, and I think they're doing that on purpose. So I one of the things I would like to address with Alex is kind of trying to go back to the articles to compare apples to apples. I think, I mean, the way that I was able to rationalize the way the GameFound did things was they basically took their amount funded, which is like 85 million on via crowdfunding, on top of their pledge manager dollars funded, and that was like 150 million, something million dollars. Kickstarter, if you look at like the board game specific category, so tabletop overall includes RPGs, board game tables, accessories like STL, miniature files, print and play games, other things like that. Well, I guess print and plays in board games, but then board games specifically, it was like $113 million raised, something like that. So I can see, GameFound kind of added um, their pledge manager stuff, and that's where they eclipsed Kickstarter's stuff where Kickstarter's information did not include the pledge manager. So I think it's just GameFound trying to say like, hey, we're growing, we're awesome. I do think that and this is where I think this might have been where I used the terminology sus, where you're trying to tell a story that has a version of the truth that isn't necessarily um like the unadulterated obvious truth, but there's no shame in doing that, because you're trying to show people that you're successful. It's just a little bit like um you know hiding that you're doing that is a little I don't know. I mean, I use the term sus, but I guess it's a little too heavy handed. If you guys can think of the right terminology, I don't think it's dishonest. I think that it's convenient. It's a very convenient way to position something. And as an independent kind of third party, I don't think there's anything wrong with kind of calling that out and calling a spade a spade.
Well, this is the danger of marketing, right? Because we've seen this with, I suppose, other agencies, and something that we've been made aware of ourselves to be careful how we phrase certain things. Like, we could say, "Oh, we've raised, millions on Kickstarter or whatever," but what we actually mean is we've helped raise that amount, because
Hmm.
how much is directly attributable to us, and there's other
Yeah.
people involved, and like, we've
Hmm.
actually seen this before where maybe we've done the brunt of the marketing for a particular client, and then
Hmm.
some other they hire another agency maybe at the end,
That ran a
or
free
or
contest
they
on
run a free
Reddit.
contest or something, and then that those people, and this actually happened to one of our clients. It was like,
Yeah,
what
it's
is
like,
a
did you
Reddit?
really just take credit for like hundreds of thousands of dollars because you ran a contest for these
Yeah, there
people?
was, yeah, so some Reddit ran a contest for one of our clients and then was claiming the entirety of the amount raised to their single contest. So
Yeah.
things like this happen, But my overall point being is that this is sort of a tendency within marketing agencies to sort of,
Hmm.
I suppose, inflate their numbers by
Yeah.
how they word it. Like, yeah, I suppose that's technically correct.
Yeah, and I actually see this all the time in, as on the SEO marketing side, which we have, about half of our business comes in through small businesses that do that are service based, typically service based businesses, plumbers and roofers, and all sorts of different industries. Um, we find whenever we take on a new client that has had several relationships with previous marketing agencies, they're always negative experiences, and sometimes it can be like an abusive boyfriend where the marketing agency will conduct like psychological warfare on the client so that they'll think it's their fault that like they're not getting results. In fact, one time, we took this plumber on, and he was a really nice guy, such a nice guy. And I was like, he came into my house, replaced my water heater. And I'm like, man, you did such a great job. I really appreciate, and he had to come back another day, and he charged me right, and he took great care of my house because our water heater exploded, and so he went there, came quickly, charged me a fair wage, and it was like, wow, that's rather uncommon for plumbers just to not find something. Oh, your doohickey is bad, and I have to go to Home Depot to replace it. That's going to be another $300. It's like, is it really though? It's like, that's very common. One time I got charged $700 to replace a toilet that the plumber got for free. So anyway, um, it's just can be an untrustworthy industry. So anyway, I tell this guy, yeah, you need to like I need to work for you. I run kind of an exclusive relationship with people in an area. If I get a plumber in like, so let's say San Diego County, North San Diego County, I'm not going to also do marketing for another plumber in North San Diego County because it's dishonest. If I'm like, I'm going to get you number one on Google, if I have two clients, there's only one spot at the top of Google, right? So
Number two.
yes, exactly. So we do like an exclusivity thing, making sure that we don't have I don't know, what is it I forget what the term is called, but split loyalties. We don't have divided loyalties. And so anyway, the guy was like, yes, that's awesome. And he was paying us about $2,000 a month. It was a very expensive investment. The reason that he started was because he was telling me his woes about this other marketing guy. And he had given him, the guy said, oh, it's going to be like 6 months before you're going to see any movement or whatever. I'm like, okay, well, where is he sending you reports and that kind of thing? And he's like, no, he's not sending me any reports at all. Like, okay, well, let me do some research and figure out kind of independently where your website is ranking, because he's been doing this for 6 months. He's been paid, by the way, the guy was getting paid about $4,000 a month for 6 months. Or at the time it was something like 4 months. Sorry. So I'm getting my timeline wrong because it was a little while ago, and I'm telling this story off the cuff. So he comes into my house, does the water heater thing. I think he's awesome. I want to work for him. And he's got this guy that's been working for him for like 4 months so far. He said it'd be 6 months before progress. I go and look, and he is ranking for nothing. Not even his company's name is ranking. And I'm like, well, this is very suspect. And you're paying him $4,000 per month. I have a hard time seeing how this is going to change in 2 months. You may want to save $8,000 and this guy's a small business. He's like, 2 employees or something in addition to himself and his wife. And it's like their, sole income and all that. I was like, and he came from like really awesome story. He came from abject poverty and whatnot. It's just a really cool story. And I'm just like, you could save like $8,000. He's like, yeah, but I really want to give this guy his full, like, what I committed to 6 months with him. So I want to give him the full 6 months. I'm like, okay. So then 2 months later is when I won him as a client, because I was like, I did the lookup, and it was like, man, you're not ranking anymore. You've got to cut this guy off, And he's like, okay, I'm going to. And so I'm working for him at about half of what he was paying. Like, I don't need $4,000 a month. I don't think that you can get actual return at that unless we're doing like running Google ads or something. And so he's like, okay, let's do it. And then we start getting him results like within 2 months. And so 2 months later, I come back and I talk to him. I'm like, hey, how's everything going? He tells me that he's still paying this other guy, that he's still paying this other guy $4,000 a month and paying me $2,000 a month. And that the other guy, when he called to cancel, he hired me and then he called the other guy to cancel. The other guy said, hey, this other company that you hired has been making changes and totally removed all of your ranking. And now we have to start over from the beginning because of the mistake that you made hiring this company. And so they said they basically were lying through their teeth in order to make money from this guy, in order to siphon money like a vampire from this um, guy who was too nice. And I read that guy the Riot Act. I read my own client the Riot Act. I'm like, you are paying for this guy's vacation in Hawaii. You need, and this guy is taking advantage of you. I will not let that happen to you. You need to call him and cancel. There's no other way about it, you know? And he did. Thankfully, he did. And then he got, great results from us, and it's still a client to this day. But several years later. But the crazy thing is, like, this is not uncommon at all in marketing.
Mm.
You will get promised things, and then in some cases, you could be blamed for things outside of your control, and many other things that I find more common than that is actually that marketing companies will use complex language to position themselves as an expert, but you don't,
Mhm.
as like a layperson, you don't really understand everything about what they're saying. Like, we need a 3x ROAS, and it's like, what does that even mean? It's like, yes, if for every dollar that you pay me, I need to earn $3 back for you in order to make our services worthwhile. How complicated was that to explain? But you understood the second, but the first might be total gibberish. And so you'll have companies oftentimes showing that they're an expert by, using confusing language or using techie language, when you should really speak the common language of the people. And there are so many other things. Anyway, so being in this industry, we see the worst of the worst, and we know how to perceive, or how to kind of interpret what is being written. And so when you read this Kickstarter article, I mean, most everybody does it. We try not to exaggerate our results. In fact, in some ways, we kind of, well, I don't want to like belabor the point, but it's just important for us to be able to be honest, because there are people that rely on that honesty. Like, you can't learn everything about everything. Otherwise, you're never gonna you're gonna spend so much time. You're never gonna be successful. Um, at like you're never gonna be good at any one thing if you're just trying to learn everything. So I think it's important for a creator, a business owner, a publisher, to learn enough about a subject to be dangerous and to know when they're being lied to, and then stick to what makes you, where your core competencies are: making games, running crowdfunding campaigns, making money that way, delighting your fans, that kind of thing.
Well, I
And
think it's actually the
so
sign of a master who can take very complex topics and distill it down to something that anyone can understand. So if you can't understand your so-called expert because they're speaking these high convoluted terms, it's probably because they're not an expert. They're probably trying to hide something from you. So I
right,
think it's very important that they're able to transpose complex ideas and systems so that anyone can understand them. So analogy is a great way of doing this.
I wholeheartedly agree. That's why I like telling stories, and I like using analogies, and it just helps
Even if
people
some of them are
understand.
historically inappropriate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was evidently it was a there was a pretty heavy-handed analogy that you
It
used
was,
that
but I
will.
think the point still stands.
Yeah.
I think the point was clear.
Yeah. So, and we'll get into that more with Alex. I'm sure that'll be a fun one. So then let's move on into this Kickstarter article. Further in, Kickstarter listed their top 10 highest funded tabletop games of 2024. They're including RPGs because the number one is Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere RPG, which raised $15 million. And Altered Trading Card Game by Equinox raised $6.7 million.
Can we practice this world?
Yep, that was one of our clients.
Hmm.
Um, and so anyway, we've got I need to like pitch some of these top ranked clients. I've got good friends over at Brotherwise Games, and I need to, but their marketer obviously crushed it. So how am I gonna compete? Like, hey, you want to hire another marketing company even though you raised $15 million? So I don't know. I would love to earn Brotherwise as a client. So anyway, but yeah, so these were kind of in response to GameFound's top 10 list, that they did in their own campaign. They showed their top 10 projects, and just like GameFound did, to kind of show, hey, look, we're kind of a big deal too. And their numbers, if you just take the top 10 list here and compare it to the GameFound top 10 list there, they're obviously using stuff from games instead of board games. They're using RPGs and whatnot. It looks quite impressive.
Yeah, certainly. And it's interesting that they also don't include GameFounds or any other project, any other platforms numbers. They make it like, if you read this at face value, you would think the top 10 highest funded tabletop games of 2024 on Kickstarter. That's an
Yeah.
important thing to mention. Just kind of ignoring other platforms like BackerKit and GameFound, because I'm sure there'd be some that would kind of outrank these.
Right. Well, it's what GameFound did as well in theirs. They listed the top, and they were very upfront about this in their graphic, which I think is a cooler way to explain than showing a like a just text. But the graphic that GameFound used showed the top 10 campaigns on GameFound in 2024. So this is an example of like pure unadulterated honesty. I used the word unadulterated at least once in this podcast already, but I'll use it again. Whereas Kickstarter is kind of being the deceptive one here. They're being the sus one here. The top 10 highest funded tabletop games of 2024. They are not the top 10 highest funded tabletop games. They're the top 10 highest funded tabletop games on Kickstarter in 2024, right? So
Yeah.
important to find where apples to apples is the where the comparison lines up. So, but they do have a very impressive numbers. I think GameFound has like overall, like the high end is owned by Kickstarter right now because of the Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere RPG. But then like after that, you go from like 15 million to 6.7 to 3.3 million dollars. There are several, like, let's see, 1, 2, 3 projects that are 3 million, and then you've got 1, 2, 3 projects that are in the 2 million range. And GameFound has 7 million, 7 million, and then 2 at 4 million, almost 5, and then 2 at the high threes with 3 of, and then one in another one in the threes. So like overall, I'm not sure which company's top 10 actually earned more. I would have to do some mathing, but they're pretty comparable. But I would say that there are a lot more campaigns that kind of reach that mid to high funding, whereas Kickstarter is very like top end heavy, with like a couple of big creators. So I think Kickstarter, by the way, Kickstarter posted a job opening for an Alex Radcliffe, basically. Did you know that?
No, I did not know that.
Yes. So Kickstarter posted a job opening for a liaison in the tabletop space, where it's their job to get kind of keystone or key accounts and service those key accounts. So they want to work with large creators and maintain their large creator base. And they said that it's a pro if you've been involved in the games industry for 6 to 8 years. If you're a Kickstarter creator, that's a bonus. But what they really want is they really wanted an audience that you can talk to. So like, I could, I'm sure that they would be like, oh, you're a marketing guy with a podcast, maybe. But you look at somebody like, I don't know, Tom Bassel with the Dice Tower. It's like, oh, he's got hundreds of thousands of subscribers. That guy would earn the job much easier than I would. So if so that what they're looking for is like a built-in audience that they literally look at what Alex Radcliffe does and like, we need one of those for our company. And it's like 120 to 140,000 a year. You have to move. I want to say there are only like a few states that you can work in. You can work in the UK. So I don't know, Sean, if you decide you want to just like dump everything, start a YouTube channel and get famous, this might be for you. So but yeah, so that's something that they're doing. So they recognize clearly that Alex is doing a great job for GameFound, right? I think so. at least. What do you think?
Yeah, well, certainly if they're opening up this position, I think this article uh, has stressed that. And to be honest, Kickstarter has closed the gap in a lot of ways to GameFound. I think GameFound has sort of been the catalyst of change because at one stage there were so many more better features on GameFound. You could create referral links before a project went live. You couldn't
Hmm.
do that on Kickstarter. You could create images and your actual pledges. You couldn't do that on Kickstarter. There was this anchored menu. The pledge manager was built in. You could install a pixel. All these things were not connected to GameFound. But since GameFound really has tapped into these areas, Kickstarter can do all those things now. So it's really closed the gap in what makes. And then this is why the debate now is really about audiences and can success be done on which platform, and do I get more people coming in from here or there? And those are all the questions you have to align now
Yep.
because in terms of features, they're pretty much the same at this
Yeah.
point in terms of the actual technology and how it works.
Well,
So
they're
what makes
definitely
them
narrowing
unique?
the gap. I think GameFound is in my mind, GameFound is clearly far ahead in technology. They are
Mm,
the best platform as far as like just the level of development, the how um user like their UI UX is really good. Their design, the actual design of the website, it's clearly been developed by a company. Awaken Realms kind of started this GameFound. It's clearly been developed by a company that knew exactly what they needed and had the resources to make it happen. And it started with like a blank canvas. So they're able to work much faster. Kickstarter was really slow. They had at the time a CEO that just didn't understand what the audience, or didn't care what the audience what the Kickstarter audience wanted. And then they sent him packing, and or he decided to spend more time with his family and then pursue other interests. And then they brought in a CEO that's like doing great. Kickstarter's CEO is doing great and really trying to catch up, recognizing that they're behind. Um, and so Everett Taylor is his name,
mhm,
and so they're trying to catch up. But Kickstarter, the advantage of Kickstarter is I believe that they have a greater organic traffic. They're still, instead of an 800-pound gorilla, they're more like a 600-pound gorilla, and GameFound's like a 450-pound gorilla. So Kickstarter is bigger, but GameFound's like faster and more mobile. So I think the gap is going to continue to narrow between Kickstarter and GameFound. And whereas a year or 2 years ago, I felt like GameFound is a very niche platform for Awaken Realms. Now I actually feel like it's not a complete mistake to use GameFound. And there are many clients that we work with on GameFound. And, it's not like we do. I would say we probably market more games on Kickstarter because Kickstarter has a lot more. But GameFound, we do a ton of projects on GameFound. So I don't think that GameFound is right for everybody. And I would say Alex agrees with that. He looks to find if a project is right on GameFound, but they're certainly working toward becoming the right platform for everybody. And in some respects, they're focused on the tabletop niche alone, whereas Kickstarter is focused on like kind of focused on everything. They need to fund, um, you know, the coolest pants ever or whatever. And GameFound is
so the
just,
Cocoa Pans.
yeah. So anyway, so I think that that's when, and in fact, if GameFound expanded into video games, like they kind of are expanding into AdFound, and they're expanding into, they started out as a pledge manager, which seems kind of a peanut butter and jelly thing. They have a pledge manager and a crowdfunding platform. That makes sense, but they're expanding into all sorts of other areas that their customers want, so they can be a one-stop shop. And then Kickstarter started doing the same thing. I think that that's a mistake. But if GameFound expanded into like the coolest pants ever, I would say that'd be a huge mistake. And the only reason that Kickstarter has been able to expand into like pretty much every industry, if you will, like technology and clothing and games and whatever, is because they really had no major competition.
They're the
Indiegogo, I
first.
guess, was one big one, but they are, a far cry separated from Kickstarter now. So, um, So in that respect, GameFound is doing a really great job remaining focused on their niche, which is gaming, actually tabletop gaming. So anything else that stands out to you in this article you wanted to go over? I mean, we've got
Not
some video game
particularly.
stuff.
It's way near the end now. I suppose just at the end here, they really kind of emphasize Kickstarter continues to be the go-to platform for game creators, big and small. They just make this kind of affirmative statement. It's like, okay, right.
Yeah, I think that they're throwing their weight around as well, kind of talking in a way to they're assuming that others that have read this that are reading this article have read GameFound's article, and so that's another little shot fired. It continues to be the go-to platform for game creators, big and small. And then they actually have another stat here that's like 78% of games projects that raised $100,000 or more were launched on Kickstarter. That's probably the single most powerful statistic to me. But I'm not exactly at this point, I'm not exactly sure what to make of it. I know that Kickstarter has a lot more creators than GameFound. And the fact that GameFound has 360 campaigns and Kickstarter has, 5,300 campaigns that funded. That's, I mean, if we go with all the campaigns launched on Kickstarter, that's like Kickstarter has almost 20 times more campaigns that launched in the games category than GameFound's. But, I mean, if GameFound represents between 5 and 10% of game campaigns that were launched, just the rest being on Kickstarter, 70, carving out 22% of games that raised, $100,000 or more is pretty impressive. I will say that BackerKit has, a number of campaigns that raised over 100,000. They have plenty of them, but so that number is included here. It divides the pie a little bit more. But overall, I mean, it's an impressive number that I am wondering, how much smaller will that get over time? You know?
I suppose they end what they conclude saying, "Hey, we're not done. We're going to keep on making things better." And like they sort of at the end they have this section in bold saying that they listen to the community and that we're going to continue to improve things,
Mhm.
making it easier and more rewarding and more effective, and bring your ideas to life. So that's how they conclude this article. So it's like we're not
Yeah.
over yet, and we're going to continue to listen to you guys and do what you want us to do. So please stay with us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I will say they in their last the looking ahead section that concludes this article, they use the late pledges as we've introduced new features designed to help creators raise more funds and expand their reach. Late pledges have enabled creators to continue raising funds even after the campaign's ends. And they're they also have Kickstarter Performance, which is a performance marketing thing that is really, from what I understand, it's really run by Jellop, which again I don't like performance marketing, but they have a system that does that as well. So GameFound, I think is just with their AdFound system is, I think it's a little bit better than Kickstarter's system because you're able to kind of control stuff on your end a little bit more. They're also offering like a $400 freebie, if you try AdFound. I think that's been expired now, but late pledges are a big deal. Like I raised $20,000 more on my Kickstarter campaign because of late pledges. And so that is probably the biggest needle mover to me in all of the stuff that Kickstarter did. That's the number one thing. I'd really love to see Kickstarter, um, as far as features that they're adding. I really want stretch pay. I think that's probably GameFound's number one thing that they've got right now. Stretch pay is another way to help, especially in like challenging economic times. I feel like if I had stretch pay, I would have made more money because there were a lot more people that, last year when I ran my Kickstarter campaign, a lot more people than before were saying, how can I split this payment in half or whatever so that I can afford it, because they really wanted to back the game, but they didn't have as much disposable income, and so they wanted to put it on a like a you know charge over that was split in half or over 6 months and whatnot. And that's one of the reasons we're keeping our pledge manager open as long as possible, because as soon as like when the campaign ends, they're going to be able to, well, because the campaign's ended, and they're going to be able to upgrade their pledge and pay the rest of the money for shipping and whatever other add-ons or upgrades they wanted, and actually split that payment. But even still, it would be nice if Kickstarter had some sort of system that just allowed people to do that too. Are there any features that you think that GameFound has, or that you would like, Kickstarter to implement, um, that that you think would kind of help them recover some of their market share?
Maybe the only thing would be like community spaces groups. I think that's one advantage that GameFound has right now, is that when you go to a page, you can leave comments before it even launches. So there's sort of like this community aspect there, and I think they need to make a greater emphasis of that on GameFound as well. But something like that, I can imagine making a big difference if people start to use Kickstarter as almost like a social site. That, oh, here we're all kind of discussing. I suppose that becomes the comment section of Kickstarter updates. So
Yeah,
there really is kind of like this blogging kind of environment there, which is sort of suited towards something more like a community space where people can talk about different things. And yeah, I agree. Some type of stretch pay, or even if it's some type of subscription. So you subscribe to Kickstarter, and you know if how many months you're subscribed, you get credits. Almost like Audible on Amazon, you get these credits, and you can spend them when you want. So if there's something where you just subscribe, and monthly there's this amount coming out of your account that you can then use on a particular project, so that it kind of supplements these. And then maybe that Kickstarter takes a smaller fee. They don't take their 5%, from subscribers, so they can give a little bit more back to the community or whatever. So
yeah,
that might be something cool that they do. Just so people subscribe to, like, I know, Kickstarter Premium, and they might get some special perks, or
that's pretty interesting. I think that's really cool. I'd love to have them. What GameFound has right now is on their pre-launch pages. Like you said, there's a comment section. You can even pin a comment. They have threaded comments, which are really great. More user friendly than Kickstarter's threaded comments. And it's easy, pretty easy to like search through there. And then one thing that I think is really cool, probably one of my favorite as a developer, or rather as a marketing guy, when you post an update on GameFound, two things happen. One, you get to see, so all of your followers see that update. I think that might be something that Kickstarter would have a hard time implementing, because, they're the people that use Kickstarter have backed so many Kickstarter campaigns that they're getting a lot of notifications. So every single update that a game produces going to the followers, rather than just the final 48-hour notification, I think could cause make some waves in Kickstarter's ecosystem. But overall, I think that it would be better if you had updates that followers actually saw, which is a huge advantage that GameFound has over Kickstarter. So people get emails whenever you write it, whenever they're following, and then you give an update. And then the second thing is, GameFound has metrics on their updates, so you can see what happened as a result of the update, where people clicked on the update, they read it, and then your pledges increased by a certain amount or decreased by a certain amount. You got this number of pledges. That's a big deal, I think. Very helpful to know, but it's not something that, it might change my, what I emphasize over time in updates, but it would just be really cool to see, like, oh, I wrote this update, I spent all this time, and look, it had a big impact on our campaign. You can kind of do that right now with it. Like if you go to KickTrack, you can see, normally I have 10 backers a day that back my game, but this day I had 55. What happened on that day? I posted the update revealing the new character or something. That's something that you can kind of do in a different way, not with such accurate data. But I like to see that too. So overall, I do think the competition is healthy for us as consumers, crowdfunding consumers. I think that GameFound is going to continue to gain market share and gain respect in the crowdfunding space, and I'm all for it. Like I'm not a pro only Kickstarter human. I think, in fact, if you knew my history with Kickstarter, I was a very very frustrated with Kickstarter as a creator when I launched my first campaign. So it's, it's like I see Kickstarter as useful to my interests and my needs, but not, I'm not like a Kickstarter loyalist. Same thing with GameFound. Like if it's better for me personally, then I will use it. But I don't owe GameFound anything, just like I don't owe Kickstarter anything. I have the benefit of being an independent creator, seeing which is best for me. And also when we counsel our clients, we do the same with them. I'm not telling people you need to use Kickstarter. It's clearly better than GameFound. That's not something that's happening in the background.
Mhm.
But we'll look at their individual project. I will always ask them, which what have you been thinking? Are you going to Kickstarter? Are you going to GameFound? What are you what are your thoughts on that? And we've had some be very decided, like, oh, we're definitely using GameFound. Like Gabe Barrett, for example, he's like, oh, I don't want to use Kickstarter ever again. I'm only using GameFound from now on. And then he's found great success there. And Kickstarter's lost, for frankly. And then we've had other clients that are like, oh, no way, I don't want to ever use GameFound because my audience is on Kickstarter, and that's okay too. And as the marketer, I can give my opinion, but at the end of the day, my job is really to support your vision as a client. So it's not my job to tell you, like, to just twist your arm, strong arm you into using one platform over the other. So um, yeah. So any final thoughts, Sean, on this thing
Not
before
an
we
article.
come in
No, I
for a
think
close?
we've kind of covered it. We'll include a link in the show notes. One thing we want to do in 2025 moving forward is we want to start interviewing more people. So if you have any ideas of who we should interview, make sure to let us know in our Facebook community. We'll include a link in the show notes to that as well. So anybody want us to interview, just mention it there, and we'll try to organize that.
Yeah, and then in addition to that, anything that you would like us to address with Alex, I think it would be a great opportunity to. So we'll create a post in our Facebook community asking about very particular things that you want us to address, and we'll do that together. We'll probably come up with that. I'm guessing we'll come up with that podcast maybe next week's episode, but time will tell. We're working on it in the background, so hopefully it will be edifying to all that listen. So till then, we're gonna have Robot Richard send us on out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.